Hi there, and welcome to another episode on NetSupport Radio. I'm Al Kingsley, and I'm really pleased today that I've got somebody who's got bags of experience and some really interesting topics that I'd like to unpick with him. Jethro Jones. Jethro, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Pleasure to have you on the show. And I always like to start with a bit of an introduction. I kind of love the fact that you refer to yourself as an education and leadership nerd. Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
Always
Thank
good. You're the founder of Transformative Principal and under the same name, host of the longest running EdTech leadership podcast, Transformative Principal. You're also the author of SchoolX and the founder as well as the Transformative Leadership Summit, an online leadership conference that you started back in 2016. You're also, squeezing into your time somehow, the founder and co-host of Cybertraps podcast as well. Quite a list, sir.
It sure is. Somebody said if you have too many irons in the fire, then it's just one more hot handle to grab, and maybe that's what I'm experiencing right now. But I just love what I do, so I'm grateful I get a chance to do it.
Absolutely, and for me, it's lovely because normally we always start off our conversations and podcasts with people just talking about the basic rules and groundwork. And when it comes to podcasting, you need no advice from me, certainly, in terms of having a conversation. But if we were going to pick a time after the last 18 months to talk about some of the subjects when it comes to the challenges for leadership and what we've seen in education of recent events, now is certainly a very apt time. I know for some, the narrative might be we're on the home straight. It doesn't feel like that on the coalface, I have to say. Still lots of challenges ahead. So if I may, let's kick off with a kind of a nice opener question that we could perhaps chew the fat on and have a little conversation. So the pandemic has changed all areas of life, including work and education. I think we all get that. What have you seen that has changed with the pandemic most of all?
Most of all, that's crazy because so much has changed. It's hard to say what really is the one thing. But I think the way that I would approach that is, one, from a personal standpoint of people are more stressed now than they probably ever have been in their whole life, which is a bad place to be, first of all. And then from a technical standpoint, we've had to completely change the way that we do education overnight, and schools are typically very, very slow to make changes and very slow to adopt new technologies. But we had to overnight last year. And so I think the good aspect of that is that it's shown us that we can make changes. And even if they are uncomfortable and painful, we can make the changes that we need to better serve our students. And that resilience of educators to be able to do that, I think, is just incredibly valuable.
I love the fact that you've picked that, Jethro. One of the things that I often talk about this side of the pond on the same subject is that often when we've talked about the role of technology and building digital strategies and implementing in schools, it's been on the to-do list for a long time, but we've always had that kind of discussion about we haven't really got time right now. And the last 18 months has just proven how adaptable educators have been, and that with everything else on the list in terms of keeping our workforce and our students safe, actually, we did have time to adapt, and in many ways, education adapted far quicker than many in the corporate space.
And I think that's a real truth that we did adapt quickly, and we started, especially things like getting food out to every kid here in the United States. It became a priority, and a lot of principals started focusing on getting food out to their families to make sure that people had food, because so many kids get free and reduced lunch here at school. And so that became a big priority, and you needed systems and technology to set those things up and make sure they happened. And it's just really amazing how people have done that. I think the other thing that you mentioned, it's been on the to-do list for a while, and as I think about that, I think about the way that it was forced upon us and people had been thinking about it. So those who were thinking about it were prepared and ready to go, and those who weren't thinking about it could turn to the people who had been thinking and say, what are we going to do here? How do we make this work? And they were given the green light. I talked to one superintendent who had been trying for years to get her board to accept a one-to-one laptop initiative in her district. And when the pandemic hit, she said, I wrote a check for $1 million that day and made sure we got devices for all of our kids. And she had been planning on it for years and had wanted to do it and was coaxing and trying to convince the board we need to do this. And then finally the pandemic happened. So then she was ready to go and she was prepared, which I think is really a key feature of transformative leaders who know I've got to be prepared for whatever happens, even when we have no idea what that could be, as she obviously didn't.
Absolutely. I have to say, I'm slightly jealous of the $1 million check. Certainly in my schools, we weren't on quite the same budget. But one thing that was lovely, and you've alluded to it there, was the fact that actually there was a bit of a green light to staff that wanted to innovate, to actually take risks. For the first time, they were actually empowered to go away and try new stuff. And sometimes that's the catalyst for innovation, is actually giving people the opportunity just to say, might work, might not, but right now we need to try some new things to try and mitigate the challenges.
Well, and that's exactly the point, that we tried a lot of new and different things. We didn't know how they were all going to work. We didn't know if they would be the right thing that we needed to happen. And on the one hand, that was a scary Wild West kind of place for everybody to be in. But on the other hand, it was exactly what we needed. And I'm all for personalizing education, and I think that's really important. And rather than saying for the whole country or for the whole state or for the whole district, here's how we do it, saying you do what's best for the kids in front of you, rather than saying we're going to all follow the same standard. And that can create some challenges, to be sure, but if it's approached in what I think is the right way of putting the kids first, I think you can overcome those challenges.
Oh, amen, Jethro. That's something that I am always talking about. No two schools, no two cohorts are the same. No two teaching cohorts are the same. So the idea of that one prescriptive model just misses so many opportunities for that personalized learning. Listen, we've talked about lots of things that we recognize schools have tried lots of new things and adopted rapidly, and in many cases done a really good effort in terms of trying to mitigate some of the gaps. How do we go about sort of selecting and determining which of the things we've tried we should adopt? That kind of, what do we embed?
Yeah, that's the real key feature. And I think that the most important thing to ask is, what is right for our students at our school? And you have to get down that granular. And a district can attempt that, but some districts are huge and have, thousands and thousands of students. And so you can't meet the needs of everybody by doing the same thing. So really, you have to go down to the school level and say, what do the kids in our school need? Not what will be nice, but what do they actually need, and start there. And, for example, to get really specific, it's snowing here in Washington where I live, and we might have a snow day tomorrow, which means that the kids are going to be home instead of in person. Here in our community, what makes sense is to ensure that we have a system to continue learning even on the days when school is canceled. Because if we can do that, we can mitigate the school days that we have. One district I work with in Wisconsin, they created a alternate learning day, I think is what they call it, where when it's a snow day, then they have a plan to enable kids to still be in school, quote unquote, during that day. And they set this up 2 or 3 years ago. And then in 2019, they had like 11 snow days in a row or something like that. And rather than canceling school and making it up in the summer, they were able to just continue to have school. And that district was forward thinking enough to say, we can do this, we can plan for it, and we know something like this could happen, so let's make a plan. So starting with those very basic things of what are we going to do if we have a snow day. Now, if you don't live in a place that snows, you probably don't need to put as much emphasis on that. You need to put emphasis on other things, but you really need to look at your school and what needs to change and what needs to be adopted for your specific clientele.
I think that's a really, really good example. It's something we've discussed here. We talk about snow days, and certainly for our very youngest learners, we still want them to get outside and experience the snow, but that can be done in fun, project-based ways as well. The same when it comes to holiday time, when there's revision classes for students accessing content online. One of the things that feeds really nicely into, though, is that concept that right now the challenge of what do we continue using? There's that sense of we don't want to lose the skills and the PD that's been evolved over the last 18 months. So actually thinking about the tech we've used during the pandemic to provide learning, there's some real positives in finding ways post-pandemic to still use that in a positive way and retain those skills within the teaching cohort as well.
Yeah, I think there is. And I think the first step to that is recognizing that students still learned during the pandemic. And one of the phrases that just drives me nuts is the idea of learning loss. And no kid lost anything that they learned over the pandemic. And every kid learned new skills and new abilities over the pandemic. And when we say learning loss, we automatically judge the kids and say, what happens outside of school doesn't mean anything inside of school. And you and I both know that that's just absolutely false, that kids can learn regardless of where they're at. And so we need to take that idea of learning loss off the table and value what they did learn. But then we need to recognize that kids aren't where we would expect them to be. And we need to change our expectations and recognize that they have different life experiences, and no kids in history have experienced what our kids now have experienced. And it's going to be a defining characteristic for their whole entire lives. And those who I was young when the Challenger spacecraft blew up and there was a teacher on board. And I remember where I was when I watched that and what that was like. People who were alive when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I'm sorry for using American references here, but I don't know big events in British history that well. But, the bombing of London during World War II, people who were young during that time, it has shaped their lives. And we need to recognize and value that matters and that is learning in and of itself.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. We over here, that one of the national phrases was about catch up. And that's something we try and avoid in schools, because again, it's that starts the negative conversation with the child, that they already feel they're on the back foot. And actually for many of our learners, particularly in primary, a lot of our learners learn just different skills. It might have not been planned in the curriculum the way that it happened, but spending more time with family members, doing whether it's cooking or getting involved, language skills, project-based, there's always different strengths and areas that you can then build on. And it's certainly now we focus more on how does technology perhaps supplement that kind of personalized learning to accelerate learning or supplement the learning, rather than to talk about it in that catch-up sense. Can we talk a bit about leaders? Because for all the challenges we've seen for our workforce, we know there's been some real challenges on our leaders, and it's one of those professions. Certainly here in the UK, we have real concerns about the number of experienced educators who are leaving their leadership roles. And the lack of appetite, sometimes understandably, for others to want to fill those roles. So what have you recognized has changed for principals and administrators in education since the pandemic?
Yeah, I think one big area that is emblematic of a lot of other things is that principals are doing contact tracing. And that is a busy work type of thing that is putting out fires and not leading. And it is basically just doing data entry and following the paper trail. And it is a total time suck for principals. And that has been very, very challenging, I know, for a lot of principals. And it has added an immense amount of work to their workday. But then at the same time, a lot of principals didn't know who else they could give it to. They didn't have anybody that they could say, this is your job and I need you to focus on this. And so they took it on themselves. So that idea of leaders being saddled with tasks that are not about leadership makes it more difficult for them to actually be leaders and pushes them more into the role of being managers. And I see this as a layered thing. When we hire a school leader, a lot of people use the phrase warm body, that we just need somebody in a position in a classroom or a principal, and nobody wants that. The next level up is that they're managers. And so they're running around putting out fires. They're trying to figure things out and just make sure the school doesn't get destroyed during their tenure, right? And they don't inspire anybody. They don't help anybody grow. They're just maintaining the status quo and not trying to develop anything. The next level up is leaders, where leaders are the ones who they have a vision, they know where they're going, they try to get people to move in that same direction. And then what I think is the top level is designers, people who are designing their schools to make them work for the people that are actually attending. And when you're doing things like contact tracing or kinds of management tasks that don't allow you to be a leader and then a designer, then it just makes it really hard. And I've seen a lot of that happen. Contact tracing is just one example of that.
Yeah, we have similar challenges here. And I think, your point really resonates. One of the things that I'm really conscious of is that our senior leadership across our schools are very much focused on today and tomorrow rather than this year and next year. And then as a result, there's a gap in the time available for that strategic thinking, that planning, the longer term, because it is so much about operational activity. And in one regard, I never critique, because I do think it's credit to our senior leaders that they're rolling their sleeves up and dealing with these challenges rather than burdening some of their team lower down the food chain within the school. Sure. And they're trying to take the responsibility. But you're right, it does very much kind of change that. Do you see a correlation with that, with the challenges in terms of well-being? I mean, one thing we've seen here in the UK is, the first narrative was children back into school. Let's talk about learning. Well, actually, let's talk about their social, emotional, and mental health. Let's actually address some of the much bigger issues in terms of getting them to a place where they're actually fit and healthy to be learning. And the SMH, as we refer to it, was kind of a key one. But I'm also conscious that the same applies to our teaching workforce as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that everybody needs support, and you have to be in charge of that. And for many years, the idea has been you go to a conference or the school will provide some sort of professional development to help you get better. And I really think that people need to take more control of their own professional learning, which is what I did with my podcast, Transformative Principal. I didn't like what I was getting as a principal myself. And so I said, I'm going to go find people who are doing it. And now, 460 episodes later, I feel like I have a PhD in educational leadership because I've been able to ask the right questions at the right time of the right people. And it's just been amazing. I think there's 3 different ways that we get support. We can go to a crowdsourced area of support like Twitter or Facebook or social media, YouTube. We can find all kinds of stuff out there. This podcast, my podcast, those are crowdsourced avenues of support. Usually low cost or free. Books are another place to get that. And that's all great and very good. And if that helps you, great, keep doing it. But if you need more support, you might look at some expert sourced support, which is where somebody who's an expert in a specific area can give you more specific support. That may cost a little bit more. That may be a very specific conference or something like that. You and I are going to FETC soon. That is an expert source support in my mind. And then finally, there's professional source support, which is where somebody's job is to help you be more successful in this particular area. And so for me, that's training principals on becoming leaders and designers and not just managers. And I do that. And then if you need very specific support with technology, people could turn to you and say, what do I do with this and how do I help with this? Because then you're getting something that's customized and personalized for you as somebody who needs support. And whatever one of those areas works, that's what you need to go with. And I think our big mistake over the past 20 years has been we've relied on other people to tell us when we get support, and we need to take the reins on that ourselves and be the ones looking for that support ourselves and find it and get it.
Absolutely. That really resonates with me. And I think the other thing that I hope has become stronger now is it's not a sign of weakness to say I need help.
Right.
I think often we go through our careers thinking that somehow you're judged, but the reality is who wouldn't need help with the different challenges and pressures? Yeah. Nobody can be an expert at everything. I mean, that links in quite nicely with your amazing podcast resources and the broader online community. I get a sense, from personal experience, it sometimes, top of the tree can be a lonely place. You're bearing the pressures of others and often don't have an outlet for yourself. And in a way, we often talk about the negatives, but in the positive sense, that the social media, the online educator community, whether you're a Twitterer or an Instagrammer or a LinkedIner, or you've just got your selection of favorite resources that you can consume in bite-sized chunks from different podcasts. There is a sense to me that that is actually quite a useful support network, to be part of a community and to have the pressures that you're experiencing validated, that others are experiencing the same problems.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. And about 5.5 years ago, I started what's called the Transformative Principal Mastermind, where it's a group of principals coming together, talking about their challenges, how to overcome them. And that is what I love doing, because I can facilitate these conversations between principals who are in vastly different parts of the world, and they can get support, recognizing that everybody else is experiencing this too. It's not just me, it's everybody else. And that's a really powerful place to have that kind of clear support, that when you know you're not alone, because you're right, it is lonely up at the top.
Absolutely. Can you speak sort of specifically to technology, not only for how principals manage their day and job obligations, goodness knows how sometimes, but in the new ways they might be thinking about technology acquisition for teachers?
Yeah, one of the flaws we saw for families was that when everybody just adopted whatever technology they could, we saw that it was very difficult for families to keep up. And one family would have this tool, one teacher would have this tool, another teacher would have this tool. And if you have kids in both those classes, it's really tough. So there does need to be some standardization with that. But the problem is that if it doesn't work for your students, then it's useless and it's a waste of money. And so, for example, I don't want to call out any specific tech company because that's not what I'm here to do, but there is a type of learning platform that allows kids to go in and do drill and kill, basically, where they just do these problems over and over in math. And that's all fine and dandy if that works, but when it doesn't work, it's like torture, and it's just awful, and the kids just hate it. Now, if you have a teacher who is excited about it and involved in it, and they get the kids excited about it, then that's totally different. And so what I think the big change needs to be is that we need to take the time to choose the right tools for what we're doing, and then be okay with different people using different things, but making it clear this is what we're doing. So if we're going to buy this technology for 3rd grade and a different technology for 4th grade, we have to be really clear that you're using those specific things and that you're actually using them, and that they're not just a subscription that we just keep paying when nobody's using them. So I think we got to look at the use, who's using it and how much, and then make sure that the teacher is trained well on it and knows about it and knows how to make it work effectively. If we did those two things, I think that would make a huge impact on the technology that we adopt every day.
I love that. And one of the things that I often speak about is about building a digital strategy for schools. And when you talk about technology adoption, there is those two halves that you've kind of shared there. There's the technology half about, well, ideally, let's look at tools that are device agnostic, that have that flexibility so it doesn't hinder different cohorts, and make sure that it integrates, whether it's sharing of data and so on, with other systems where possible. Because lots of schools, you're right, classes have been in silos, and sometimes you've got duplicates and triplicates of technology that isn't justified. Sometimes you're right, it's absolutely justified. And then there's that parallel bit about, when we talk about implementing new technology, the first thing I always say is you actually have to be reflective, something educators are great at, which is, what have you already got and how well is it working for you? Do you need to buy more of it? Or is it just a case of some of the subscriptions you've got, you actually don't need to renew, you need to reflect on how you're measuring their impact? And that's been another really interesting strand in a way, because it ties in with that technology adoption, I guess, that you've shared there, which is, for some schools, the measure seems to be this assumption that the more you've got tech interwoven into your school day, the better you're doing. When actually it's about where it's appropriate and where it's actually having impact. So sometimes, as I like to say, less is definitely more. It's not about how quickly or how much, it's just about how well it's being used.
Yeah, Al, I think that's really smart. And if you can see how well something's being used, then that's great. You know, as a principal, I would go into teachers' classrooms and see what technology they were using. And when a teacher came to me with a technology request, I would simply ask, how is this going to look in your classroom on a day-to-day basis? And if she could answer that and say, this is what I'm going to do every day to make it worthwhile to have it as either a supplement or an addition, or maybe a way to make it so that she could work with small groups more effectively because kids were doing other things, then it's an easy yes. If she can visualize how it's going to look on a day-to-day basis, that's way different than, well, I don't know, I think it'd be fun to try and I want to give it a shot. You know, I'm all for trying new things, and I was the teacher who would do that all the time. and there's a space for that also. But when it comes to using something on a day-to-day basis, that's where it really makes a difference. Because if you're only using something once a week or once a month, you're probably not getting the use out of it that you could be. And that's where, if it's really going to be effective, the teacher can articulate what it looks like in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a powerful place to start. And make it a conversation also. It's not a, no, you can't do that, or yes, you can do that. It's, well, let's talk about it more, and what's it going to look like, and how's it going to work, and all that. And I think those are really great ways to do it. And as I'm thinking about this, I think I have a couple of guest suggestions for this show of specialists in my previous district who are just so good at this, about adopting new technology in a really thoughtful way. So I'll make sure we talk about that later, because they would be great to explain this very specific thing of how they adopt new technology. And they've been doing it for like 15 years or something like that. It's been a long time.
Fantastic. Always interested in getting the ideas and suggestions from others. I mean, we all learn. I would like to say, you know, I refer to myself as an edu sponge, which is my way of saying most of the things I share, I've absorbed from somebody else who's done it in a different way, or a school that's been successful. And that's the beauty of our profession, isn't it, really, that within education, everybody does share and are happy to share their best practice and successes. Listen, I could talk to you for hours, but it's been great to chew the fat on some of these key topics. More importantly, if somebody wants to try something new today, a good starter for 10 would be to check out the Transformative Principal Podcast. Where would people head to if they wanted to subscribe and listen into some of your episodes?
Yeah, if you go to transformativeprincipal.com, you'll be able to find everything, and that's my main hub. So you can go there and get access to the podcast, the other professional development that I do, and that would be great. So thanks for the opportunity to be here, Al.
Not at all. And if you do want to go and listen to the podcast, just set aside about 5 years to listen to all the episodes. It's about what you'll need of content there. But as you said, it's the Encyclopedia Britannica of leadership podcasts, I think, in terms of resources there. And just finally, you mentioned it, or I mentioned at the beginning as well, Cybertraps podcast. Give us a quick summary of what kind of topics you cover there.
Yeah, so that podcast is all about the use and misuse of digital technology, especially in schools. And so we cover a wide range of topics there, and that's what I hope you'll come on that podcast soon, and I look forward to chatting with you there. But we talk about all the ways that people can get into trouble, and we talk about a lot of the stuff we talked about today. And it's with Fred Lane, who's a former school board member and an author, and he wrote the Cybertraps for Educators book, which is on its 3rd version now. He's writing the 3rd version, and you know, there's so many ways for educators to step in the wrong place with technology, and so we talk about how to be aware and not do that.
Definitely one not to miss. So that's 2 great resources for our listeners to tune into. Jethro, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you across in Orlando in a few weeks' time, FETC. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great talking to you, Al.